A very warm welcome to AGYLE, the African-German Young Leaders in Business, a program by the Agency for Business and Economic Development and Germany, Land of Ideas, on behalf of the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development and in partnership with Deutsche Welle. Our topic this afternoon is the importance of African-German cooperations. And a very warm welcome to Professor Dr. Siegfried Russwurm, the President of the Federation of German Industries, BDI. Warm welcome, Herr Russwurm.
Thank you.
But also a very warm welcome to our young leaders from Ethiopia, Germany, Ghana, and Rwanda. In the past few days, you have been working on new business models for better collaboration between Africa and Germany. And today, I look forward to a lively discussion with the President of the BDI. Professor Russwurm, thank you very much for joining us, and let me introduce you briefly before we start with your short impulse. Siegfried Russwurm is not only the President of the BDI, but also Chairman of the Supervisory Boards of the industrial companies Voith and ThyssenKrupp. He is a member of the Managing Board of Siemens. No, he was a member of the Managing Board of Siemens from 2008 to 2017. And during which time he was responsible for all industrial issues and as Chief Technology Officer for technology as well as for healthcare and human resources. And if I'm not wrong, your regional responsibilities at Siemens included Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Siegfried Russwurm is also a member of the Presidium of the German Academy of Science and Engineering, ACATEC, and of the board of the German-Swedish Chamber of Commerce. So, Mr. Russwurm, I would like to invite you now to give your short impulse. The stage is yours.
Well, thank you for the kind introduction, Ms. Ballant, and a warm welcome to all online participants. I'm indeed very happy to be with you today. For the BDI, the Federation of German Industries, it is important to strengthen the economic cooperation between Germany and African countries. But personally, and Mrs. Ballant was absolutely right, having been responsible for the business in Africa for my former employer, and even that has been disclosed who that was, for a decade, after dozens of business trips all over Africa during these 10 years, I can't think of a better way to do this than through personal contact and personal relationships. The BDI is a founding member of Germany, Land of Ideas, and as the acting president of this initiative, I have the honor that Land of Ideas will be opened in this role, and there has managed to start AGYLE. We at the BDI, we have very good experiences with our own Young Leaders Network, and I'm convinced that this concept will work here as well. Getting young and future leaders into dialogue and cooperation across countries and continents is a recipe for success in developing our future world. Over the last decade, Africa was more and more considered as a place with a promising future, with a growing middle class, booming trade, and at least in some countries, disproportionately high growth rates. Now, COVID-19 is slowing this positive dynamics down, but it doesn't change BDI's overall assessment of Africa as a continent of opportunity. During about the same time frame, 1 or 2 decades, the perception of Africa here in Europe has changed. African countries are now being considered as attractive economic partners instead of only recipients of development aid. There is a call for stronger private sector involvement in order to promote stable economic growth in African countries. However, German companies are still underrepresented in Africa compared to other world regions. BDI has tried to push a little by publishing a strategy booklet on sub-Saharan Africa, calling it Africa, Continent of Opportunities. With that, we want to convince more and more companies that it is worthwhile to have a closer look at the continent. And they do. but it's still far away of what we would like to see and far away from what is necessary to change the situation significantly. There is no doubt Africa has great potential. Nevertheless, at present, the continent is not an important market for the German economy in quantitative terms. Currently, only about 2% of German exports go to the 54 African countries, and the same applies for the German imports from Africa. Again, only 2% of our total import volume. When we look at the concrete figures, there are around 880 German companies with significant activities in Africa, providing 220,000 jobs there. About half of them are based in South Africa. And these 220,000 all over Africa, that's only 1/4 of what German-based companies have alone in the United States. The same applies for investments. What we have reached in the past is still not at the level of we would expect in emerging markets. We had 12 billion euros in 2020, growing steadily in the last years, but only standing for 1% of the total German investment abroad. Increasing investments are key, since German companies can make an important contribution to value creation, can help for skilled jobs and concrete solutions with new technologies. For example, many African countries have good conditions to produce green hydrogen and have their own plans to build a hydrogen economy. German companies, on the other hand, are well positioned as technology leaders in many areas of the hydrogen value chain. This opportunity should be seized in terms of new win-win partnerships. But when we talk to our companies and ask them what the main obstacles for more engagement in Africa are, they usually name 4 challenges, and they will not be new for you. A relatively small current market size, political unpredictability, lack of infrastructure, and a lack of skilled labor. This is why BDI is very much in favor of the African Continental Free Trade Area and very much in favor of programs like AGYLE, which can make an important contribution. At the same time, it should be easy for us Europeans to understand that we need to be careful when we talk about Pan-African subjects. The cultural diversity within Africa is not less important than the cultural diversity within Europe. And sometimes both patterns are grossly underestimated. This is one side of the coin, the local conditions. But there is also the other side. This refers to the perception that German companies have of African countries and the business risks there. In order to contribute to a more positive perspective on African countries, we launched a publication called Success Stories Africa. In that publication, German companies describe their experiences and successes on the African continent. We want to show that there are German companies who have been doing business in African countries for many years with quite success. Among others, partnership projects to support regional integration and networks between policymakers and entrepreneurs in Germany and Africa. BDI has launched a project with the focus on East Africa in 2017. It was called Creating Perspectives, Business for Development, and was initiated as a joint project with GIZ. The aim is to support regional industry and match East African with German companies to create jobs in the region and moreover create a true win-win situation. Furthermore, we are organizing events on Africa. For example, we have our so-called Women's Business Breakfasts with the Agency of Business and Economic Development. With that, we want to give female leaders from Africa and Europe the opportunity to exchange ideas and network in an informal setting. We are also looking at what the Corona crisis means for Africa. We had webinars with the Hans Seidel Foundation and the Institute for Security Studies in South Africa on the impacts of COVID-19. And finally, BDI is part of SAVRI, the Sub-Saharan Africa Initiative of German Business. It's a regional initiative together with the Association of German Chambers of Commerce and Industry the Federation of German Wholesale, Foreign Trade and Services, and the German African Business Association. The aim of SAFRI is to intensify economic relations between Germany and Sub-Saharan Africa. The best known event is probably the German African Business Summit, where business and government leaders from Germany and Sub-Saharan Africa meet every 2 years to discuss and promote their economic relations. Our second big SAFRI event is the G20 Investment Summit. We just had the third investment summit this August. High-ranking representatives from politics and business met in Berlin, including the German Chancellor Angela Merkel and numerous heads of state and government of the 12 African Compact countries. The aim is to promote private investment in reform-oriented African countries. But enough of advertising for BDI undertakings. For me, it's great that we are meeting here with so many talented young leaders from African countries and from Germany. This spurs my optimism that together we can drive African-German economic cooperation forward in the future, because trust always is built between people and not between businesses or countries. So your mutual trust, your getting to know each other is a true foundation. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward for any discussion we may have in the upcoming half hour or so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Russwurm. And that's really right. Trust, that's something we would like to build with our AGYLE network of young leaders in business. So you have asked to join us here on a Zoom meeting and not in the studio because you want to discuss with our young leaders, you want to exchange ideas and answer their questions. So if anybody of you has a question, please raise your hand digitally here. I will call your name and then you can, of course, talk directly to Siegfried Russwurm. In the meantime, while you're thinking about your questions, I have one question. Somehow, when Land of Ideas meets the continent of opportunities, and you mentioned that also in your impulse, how can the private sector in Germany and on the African continent mobilize to create business alliances and new business models, maybe without governmental support? Do you have an idea? Are there any projects you could mention already? Because this is something we are also curious to know. Is there a possibility to mobilize new business alliances or business models without governmental support?
Well, that's not an easy question. I would like to find a kind of, should I call it, compromise. What would be definitely helpful would be if certain export credit facilities would be available as a kind of fallback situation. It would make the life of companies of investors from Germany easier until this true trust is created. I've talked about the perceptions that are prevailing in Germany, and I've seen in the chat that Enoch has asked the question, what was the demographic, was the age of the leaders that make this statement? Frankly, it's not a matter of age. It's a matter of how good do you know about Africa? How many people have you met in African reality? And in order to increase the volume, one lever is to make this experience available, to spread the word by credible ambassadors. This is what we try to do with our conferences here. The other is to make the step, the risk, the perceived risk easier by catering for certain export credit facilities that would reduce the financial risk. I'm an absolute fan of direct private-to-private interaction. The good news is there are new business models emerging here in Germany, in Europe, that should find perfect counterparts in Africa. We just have to bring them together. The The downside, and again, this is not a politically correct statement, but I hope that I'm allowed to make that here. The problem is, as long as I have growth potential in areas where my perceived risk is lower, I set the priorities differently. And I've seen that in my prior life too many times. The opportunities are there and they are obvious. We have to work on the risk side. Objectively, by reducing risks of doing business in Africa and with Africa, and indirectly by state aid for this risk mitigation in terms of export credit facilities.
Thank you very much. I very much like that you have these, you make these open and frank statements. I would like to give the word to Kumbirai. Kumbirai has founded a company here in Germany, which is called Deutsch Connect, and he wants to improve also the collaboration between Germany and African countries. Kumbirai, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that presentation, Roosevelt. Yeah, I wanted to follow up on what you had said as well in asking how can the private sector move away from to do without political involvement, of which I had your answer. But I would still think that there needs to be a better plan from that, because Africa's politics is not likely to change for a long time. But the opportunities that are in Africa are going to change. You talk about the Africa becoming the biggest single market in the world when AFTA begins, which is an opportunity for German technology, German infrastructure, German vocational skills. But the politics in Africa is not going to move very quickly in that same direction. So for me, being an African based in Germany, I feel the risk factor that is there is still worth for Germany to improve from a 2% business with Africa to a better figure. I just think maybe Germany is at a good level in terms of as an economy at the moment, that it might not see, it might look at the risk in Africa as being too much, but this might change. You can really see that Africa and Germany need each other. Like I told you, the problems that some of them you mentioned in Africa, the lack of infrastructure, the lack of, in terms of the labor force, skilled labor, these are things that can become a win-win situation if Germany and Africa is partnered together. So I'm not a politician, being a private citizen and someone who's also in the private sector, I still think there's more need to be done within us, not even talking from a political perspective, because the moment we keep it from that in that side, then there's no there won't be a solution. Because some things, I mean, let's look at Europe. I also don't want to be misquoted, but I think I have to bring it here. Europe has gone through upheaval over the past 150 years to get to where it is. Africa is just going through the birth pain still of becoming a continent that is heading on its own. So it will take a long time, not even my own, generation might not be the ones that might change it. So I still think the whole political issue is not the most important, and that is my opinion. Thank you.
Well, allow me to quote one of my Italian customers. Not to be misunderstood, it was not my colleague from Confindustria, but some years ago, an Italian businessman, when I asked him, how do you deal with your government? And you know that the coalitions in Italy have been colorful. And he told me, Siegfried, you must understand that we as Italians are successful in business despite of Rome and not because of Rome. So I think we need a growing understanding here in Europe that you cannot rely on your government. It's not the paternalistic state that paves the way. You have to take your own opportunities. The good news is that our governments, whether they like it or not, they do their best in strengthening that perception also in Germany that has been prevailing in Italy only 10 years ago. So you see more and more companies, especially new companies, new founders that don't rely on government, but rather ask government to go out of the way. And maybe that's a similarity to the development of economics in Africa, that in certain aspects you have to accept the political environment, you have to accept the decisions of government, and you rather think, well, what can we do despite these boundary conditions, rather than who is helping us with the appropriate boundary conditions. So I would not wait for any state infrastructure on education, but rather see, well, what can we do together to establish our own training grounds, our own training facilities, rather than waiting that a state institution from Germany finds a counterpart in an African country to establish something. That's far too slow.
Yeah, I would agree on you. So Enoch has raised his hand. Enoch, can you open your camera, please?
Yes, it's open. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can see you and hear you.
Sure. Thank you very much. Engineer Prof, thank you for your inputs. I think the question that was asked earlier, you sort of touched on it, but the reason why I asked about the demography is to find out whether really those who are in the decision-making process, is it that they really have not understood Africa that well because of maybe the age gap, or is it that they hold on to those key fears, if I should put it, based on historical experiences? And is it that their circle of influence and their friends are not telling them the new stories? For which reason, for example, for us who are younger, we keep on telling the stories as it is to ensure that we don't have our German and European colleagues, think of the same mindset because of the kind of stories that they read and hear about what Africa is. That's why I was going to that, and that was more on the age side. But more specifically to a question I'd really love to hear your inputs on, and I share an experience. Recently on the entire new cooperation with Africa, where we have the Marshall Plan for Africa and all that, there was a project I was working on that required me to work with a German partner. Literally, that German partner decided to think that the project that would be executed here in Ghana should have the German law at its backing, rather than to understand that, well, if we choose to have a development of a project, it should be here, and we can use the Ghanaian law. I'm just bringing that in as an example to state what the fact that even though there might be very great programs designed like the Marshall Plan for Africa or with Africa, people still hold those perceptions. So I want to understand from your side, particularly with the BDI as a core component, how exactly these new innovative programs like the Marshall Plan, etc., are supposed to pan out, bearing in mind the fact that if you have those traditional engagements like the GIZ have always had, then we are going to remain in a situation where it's always going to be donor-driven. It's going to be a very slow process like you put out.
Well, I couldn't agree more. We have to get out of this perception. On the other hand, I do have some understanding for the concerns of the said partner, simply because the perception of unpredictability. So is Ghanaian law stable enough? I would assume it's less the question, do I like the law in Ghana as it is today? You deal with that and you check your business concept on whether this is doable under these conditions or not. The question is more, can I trust that the Ghanaian law will still be the same in 5 or in 10 years from now, if that is the scope of my business plan and my investment? And therefore, we have to work on perception. The old saying of perception is reality does apply. We can regret these wrong perceptions. Still, they are reality, and we have to deal with them, and preferably by exchanging experiences how entrepreneurs in Ghana are dealing with that uncertainty. It's a meeting on eyes level and exchanging experiences on eyes level, and that is utterly necessary, because it's a kind of vicious circle. Due to the fact that only 2% of the foreign trade is with Africa, you have a lot of business people that haven't experienced Africa. And then you can have all these nice words about the potential and the growing middle class and one negative experience or a negative perception, a negative joke, if you will, can destroy a lot of the positive notion unless people go there and meet and have direct interaction and meet you and your colleagues and discuss with you coming back to the initial example, How do you handle the legal uncertainty in your market, in your country? And if the answer is either, well, there is more uncertainty than what your perception is, or we found smart ways in order to mitigate certain aspects, that will create that trust. But the only way to break that vicious circle of, well, we have too few businesses or too few business volume, and the well-taken excuse gets propelled more and more, it is so difficult. We have to turn that around and discuss the positive examples.
Yeah, and this is somehow also the aim, or one of the aims of AGYLE. Yeah, I think we have told you already that we do this not only to bring this network of young leaders together to find new business models or exchange on eye level, but we also want to change the perception of Africa and Germany with you, with the young leaders. And when I went to Africa and met some of you, not the group, but some others, I thought we need to change this perception in Germany, and we need to find a way to do that with the people and not just with, you know, proclamations or publications, but we here in Germany need to meet the young leadership of African countries. So I have two more hands here. Lucretia, I think you were first, and then Anna Laura.
Yes, hello, Lucretia Löscher, working for Siemens Energy. So my question is, you know, we are also working with countries that, let me say, are not predictable like China, but there we see a great opportunity because of the business volume that we can address. So perhaps it's also about the perception how much business potential is lying in the different countries in Africa. And is that perhaps an element where we can build a bridge, talking about the energy sector, about also new sources for energy, renewables, where Africa has a lot to offer? Do you see that that could be a potential sector in which we can build bridges for collaboration?
Absolutely, absolutely. Frankly, we don't need to compare the stability of boundary conditions in China to Ghana for that sake, or Ethiopia. You're absolutely right. It is about a risk-reward ratio. And while we should work on the risk perception and sometimes on the real risk, on the other hand, we have to work on the understanding for the opportunity. And frankly, Lucretia, without going into the details and without disclosing too much in your organization, there is unfortunately a long tradition that Africa was seen, and I'm talking 10 years ago, that Africa was seen as the backup. If we have a certain capacity to build and to do business, and we allocate that to the big markets, and if there are problems in the big markets, we graciously turn to Africa and see whether there is the one or the other project that we can do. And to turn this around and to make the key decision makers that are allocating resources, talking about big multinational companies like Siemens Energy, it is about the allocation of resources by the key decision makers to the one or the other region. And here to make very clear, my running gag 10 years ago in that dispute, when I was responsible for Africa and tried to promote that as an energy market, was when I'm landing in Dar es Salaam, the airport is lighted, the city is lighted like hell, there must be power plants. Guys, don't tell me that there is no market. There must be power plants. But it is truly a matter of bringing key decision makers to Africa. That is, frankly, my strongest argument that I have. And that works better or worse in the one or the other company. In startups, it's typically easy because you only have to convince the founders. But on the other hand, if we really want to move from the 2% to 8 or 10% as a first intermediate step, we need to convince the key decision makers that allocate resources.
Anna Laura, your question, please.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you very much for everything you've said so far, Professor Russwurm. I wanted to actually relate to something you said, and also Ute. We were talking about how, or you were saying how we are kind of like a new generation of ambassadors for German and African relationships, and we were talking about creating mutual understanding and on an ICE level. So if you could give us as the ambassadors that we will be after this program for African German African relations. Could you give us like maybe 3 action points of how we can actually achieve that, based on your experience you had, and seeing us as the young generation who can also make a change in that?
Well, the strongest recommendation is to build networks with peers, and that goes on all regional levels. That goes from inter-African networks, which sometimes have been difficult. That was my perception when dealing with my African team, but also in building networks, links across continents, and to have the credible ambassadors. Then when we talk business content, the advice would be the same for a founder in Africa as for a founder in Germany or elsewhere on the globe. If you want to attract investors, try to understand what are their key concerns, what makes them happy, and what doesn't. The old saying that the worm has to taste to the fish and not to the fisherman is true here as well. Sometimes the enthusiasm about my business idea keeps me away from putting myself in the shoes of my counterpart. So proactively addressing some of their concerns, asking them about their concerns, saying, well, where's your problem? Are you afraid of legal risks? Can we talk about those and how to address them? Is the problem logistics? Do you have concerns about infrastructure? Let's find solutions for that. Or we have a good solution for that. Or we are a software-based business, so frankly, transport connections, that doesn't worry me. To really talk about these kind of concerns, spread the good examples, and also spread the mitigation for some of the perceived risk, or kill them. I'm as much as I do support the programmatic approaches, as much I know that these programs are a means to an end to establish these personal relationships and trust.
Thank you very much. So now we have Ulrich Zimmermann from the family business Sympathec.
Yeah. My question would be, because you mentioned in the beginning, for example, it's easier to convince startups, it's easier to convince small firms. And if you look in the German economy, isn't it like this, that actually the part of SMEs, small and mid-sized companies, actually one of, let's say, the driving force in the German economy? And wouldn't it make then also more sense to also have programs dedicated for small and mid-sized companies for going abroad and also establishing firms locally? Because what I've seen, and this is also, let's say, what you also mentioned, yeah, a lot of programs are targeted really like if you want to set up a big production plant or something like this. So my question is, wouldn't it also make sense to somehow focus on SMEs to go abroad?
Well, I'm not enthusiastic, frankly, about the S, because you need a certain critical mass and a certain critical competence to do that. But that's not specific for Africa. It would go for expansion into Asia as much as into South America. For mid-sized companies, I do agree. I do strongly agree. Plus, I see the opportunity of joining forces. In my firm belief, one of the key recipes of success of German industry, of German economy, if you will, is the very close collaboration between mid-sized companies and some big system integrators. And there are many examples that the big system integrators were breaking the ice and we're taking along their partners, be it as technology component specialists, be it as component suppliers, be it as distribution partners. So while I do agree that we should be creative in terms of how to motivate mid-sized companies, we should not underestimate the opportunity of replicating exactly that success recipe that big ones and mid-sized companies join forces. We've seen so many big projects, be it manufacturing plants, be it infrastructure projects, where around a multinational system integrator, maybe with a headquarter in Germany, whatever that then means ultimately, they have carried along quite some corona of mid-sized companies in order to really make this happen. So whether it's a big OEM that takes along some of their suppliers, or whether it is in a big utility project where technology experts come along. So a strong support for your initial thesis, and in addition, more interaction between large and mid-sized companies in order to utilize that recipe of success.
Mm-hmm. We have already talked about the energy sector, but in which other sectors would you see best opportunities for future investments? Is digitalization a driver maybe for African-German cooperation?
Well, definitely in the learning of a different approach to digitalization. Who has been successful in microfinancing has made totally different experiences than trying to support digital tools big financial institutions. So there are certain specifics of the learning curve in Africa where I wouldn't find a counterpart in Europe, which, well, in a way, makes the African experience unique, and thus a strong element in that. On the other hand, the old saying that it's better to have a value chain rather than just deploying resources, that's something that immediately comes into my mind. And again, it may be an old storyline, still it's a necessary aspect. And I've seen too many examples, not necessarily in Africa, but talking about Central Asia, for example, talking about Russia, for example, where governmental programs are building on the depletion of natural resources and have not established a value chain on site. So the recommendation would be to see, well, where are aspects where it's not just the natural resources that will be deployed and exported, but what can we do together in Africa on these resources? And if I take the mega theme of hydrogen, I think with the exception of Kawasaki, there are not many who argue that to transport pure hydrogen is the most smartest idea. So the question is, if I have favorable natural conditions for rather low-cost renewable energy, what can I do? What can I make out of that energy over and beyond sheer hydrogen? Are there other chemicals? Are there hydrocarbons? Is there anything on top of the value chain in order not only to sell my natural resources? That goes for minerals as well. What a pity that Africa is known as an exporter for minerals without having the opportunity to have certain steps of the value chain and thus exporting more advanced products. Yeah. This would be an interesting area for me to explore.
For sure. Katharina Hartwig is the next on my list here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I work for the Star Africa project, which is funded by the Ministry for Economic Affairs. And we are also trying to bring more German companies to Rwanda, especially, or to Africa, but also more Rwandan startups and companies to Germany. And what just came into my mind, kind of following up what you had just explained regarding the value chain, there was this discussion, especially last year, about the Lieferkettengesetz or the supply chain law. And I know the BDI was not really in favor of it so much. So I'd love to hear from you how we can actually, maybe an institution like the BDI or an organization, how we can ensure to have a fair trade, especially when it comes to resources? Or what do you usually tell German companies that have an interest going to Africa, how they can have more like a collaboration on the eye level, like to create a bridge and not to just use Africa as the continent of resources, bring them to Germany and make money with that?
Well, our criticism on the famous Lieferkettengesetz was not the question that companies should truly deal with their responsibility in accessing their supply chain. It was more about how can I easily get information for that. So our suggestion was that, for example, BAFA, that controls or is supposed to control this law, has a kind of database where, as a mid-sized company, I can get information. And frankly, preferably some whitelisting. So what about Rwanda? Is Rwanda red listed in terms of, well, stay out of that, there's a lot of hassle? Or is Rwanda whitelisted? You can do business with companies in Rwanda, provided you check the following. A very operational aspect. And an answer that's reliable. The big fear of decision makers, and that goes through all sizes of companies, is, well, is it crystal clear what I need to do, or is it vague? Don't be evil is not necessarily a good yardstick for your day-to-day operations. So what is it? And again, we have to deal with perceptions. And I stay with your example, Rwanda, and nobody from Rwanda, please get that wrong. I have no reasons other than that you mentioned Rwanda to take this as an example. What are the pain points in Rwanda? What do I have to be careful? Is it a problem of land ownership? Is it a problem of child labor? Is there any problem? Or can I be sure that the political system in Rwanda forbids child labor? Is it safe in that respect? So these kind of very tangible answers preferably from a state institution like BAFA, where I can refer to in a court case, that would be extremely helpful. The risk that we have clearly articulated is, if I can't get these answers as a mid-sized company, it adds to the risk register of this risky endeavor of doing business with a country like Rwanda. We have to take away concerns rather than to accumulate even more of them.
But I think that's where it comes in when you said how important it is to have a good network and talk to the people. I mean, for example, we had a very small, like a company from North Rhine-Westphalia, and they just wanted to do it. They wanted to train young people in image editing. And they said, okay, we've done it in Asia. Now we want to go to Rwanda. We just give it a try. So the sales manager came here, talked to the lawyers, registered his company in one day, which is possible in Rwanda, and just made it. So I think this is a great example of, I know a lot of big companies say, yeah, we don't know who is at the very end of our supply chain, but also other big companies like Tchibo, for example, what they do is like, they want to kind of break down their supply chain to have less people in there. And I think that's really helpful, isn't it?
Well, the problematic cases were less companies like Tchibo, like Ritter, that have a certain portfolio, and I'm exaggerating now deliberately, they have 50 ingredients. They have a bill of material of 50 components. The problematic aspect are the technical system integrators, where the bill of material has 5,000 items, and then it gets somewhat cumbersome. Again, I would agree to your argument. If you don't purchase these 5,000 items, but you rather aggregate them, you find partners that delivers a subsystem that reduces the complexity of the whole question, for sure.
Thank you.
The best aspect of this Lieferkettengesetz is that it will motivate people to go there and have a look, have a personal opinion.
True.
If in the legal evaluation of a potential concern, it is seen as a positive that you took your own impression. I've been there, I've looked at that, I've visited that. Worst case, somebody played a fake me, but I've been there. This may motivate additional visits. I have learned about Africa not in textbooks and not in statistics. I have learned about the opportunities of African countries when I was there, when I met the people.
Yeah, thank you. Enoch, you have another question. I don't want to read it. Could you please raise the question yourself?
Okay, well, thank you very much. So, I serve as the director of the association here in Ghana, the Renewable Energy Association of Ghana. And usually some of the concerns that we have from businesses is that people want to integrate also into Germany and other places. But we're not sure sometimes what the red tapes are or what the concerns are. Is it that there are not the possibility for African countries to easily establish in Germany, as it's almost very easy for German companies to establish here if they so decide to? So I'm just trying to understand from your end what you can say in regards to what the red tapes are, if there are, and also what opportunities there are if African companies want to establish and operate within the German space. Thank you.
Well, you know, I'm tempted to say welcome in the German reality. Don't take it personal. When I hear that you can establish a company in Rwanda in one day, that makes me jealous like hell, because it is utterly complicated. I did that for a single man consultancy company, just me. I left my board position and I tried to set up my own industrial advisor one-man show. It was utterly complex. So that red tape is there. There is a heck of a lot of red tape, but literally don't take it personal. I don't think that there are, from an administrative perspective, specific hurdles for non-German for African companies. Whether the establishment of a subsidiary in Germany for any foreign company is cumbersome, I would assume that by default, but I wouldn't see any kind of merit order in terms of, well, preferably we take the US Americans and then next in the sequence is Australia and Canada, and down the line comes whoever. I wouldn't assume that. At least I have no indications for that. But frankly, setting up any business in Germany is utterly complex. And I guess some of the German founders in the call would support that argument.
Yeah. I think we would use this network to try to change that narrative also. Thank you.
Yeah, and this would also have been a question I wanted to raise here. We are always talking about, you know, bringing German investments to Africa, but what's the other way around? But you have answered that. And somehow that leads me to my final question, as we are running a bit late, and you told me that you need to leave in a few moments. So Professor Rosbaum, we have a new elected government. Maybe you expect that question. What would be your wishes from the new elected government regarding German-African collaboration?
Well, that new government is still in the making. The three parties are working on what they call a contract for their joint government. And there are 22 working groups. What really made me happy was that working group number one is for a modern government that would help everybody in Germany to get rid of the mentioned red tape. When it comes to global trade, politics, I think we have to have an eye on realistic targets. I've met more or less the key players of the three parties that intend to form a government, and I got to know them as very realistic and practical people. Their grassroots movements sometimes give a challenge to them, and if we would move to a pathway, well, we only want to do business with our lookalikes, not in the physical appearance, but rather who shares the same legal system, the same societal system, the same education, and then it would be difficult. So what I would hope for for the new government is when it comes to international connections. And Germany and German society and German economy needs that utterly, that there is a certain realism to say, well, we accept that a partner country has its own rights, its own democracy, its own political system, and does its own decision making. And well, within certain red lines where we don't want to compromise, for example, on human rights, but within these red lines, we accept that different countries go different ways.
Yeah.
We have to step out of this perception that sometimes is still prevailing in Germany, that we tell the world how things are done best. A little bit more modesty that would go for Germany as a whole, and it includes the prospective German government.
Thank you very much, Professor Russwurm, for your open and frank words. I enjoyed the discussion very much. Thank you all, young leaders from Ethiopia, Germany, Ghana, and Rwanda, and some other countries we were discussing before, because some Germans are, you know, situated in Kigali or in Togo or in South Africa and so on. So thanks a lot for taking your time and sharing your insights with us. And yeah, I hope the young leaders will have a very good next 2 days. 2 days are left for our program. And on Thursday, we have a public viewing on your new developed business models. And I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much and have a good evening. Bye-bye.
All the best to all of you. Bye then.